Have you ever felt that gentle nudge telling you there's something more? That the path you carefully planned might not be the one that you're meant to take? I'm Marissa Switzer, and this is If I Hadn't Said Yes, Stories of Surrender and the Pursuit of Purpose. Each week, I sit down with women who have trusted their journey, stepped into the unknown, and discovered their true calling along the way. Whether you're feeling called to make a change or simply seeking inspiration from others who have taken the leap, this is your invitation to explore what might be possible if you say yes. Hi guys, and welcome to this next episode of If I Hadn't Said Yes. My name is Marissa, and this month we are doing a series all about motherhood in celebration of Mother's Day. I wanted to do this series because motherhood, pregnancy, birth, toddlerhood has absolutely wrecked my life in all the best ways and some bad ways, but regardless, I just feel like God has given me this story to share, and it was really important for me to do that here. So if you're watching on YouTube, this background is a little bit different. I am in a hotel. I'm actually in Charlotte, North Carolina, where my pregnancy took place and where the birth of my daughter took place. And so I thought it would be a good time to kind of sit down and talk about it while I'm here. So if you listened to last week's episode, I talked a little bit about how growing up, I did not want to be a mother. I did not think I was ever going to have kids. And when God wrecked all my plans in 2016, really anything was on the table. I was surrendered and open to whatever he had for me. And luckily, through meeting my husband and experiencing motherhood through those close to me and really a lot of prayer, God transformed my heart and really got me from a place of fear and anxiety about pregnancy and birth and motherhood to a place of excitement and expectancy and joy. And so if you listen to last week's episode, you'll hear that I had started basically a prayer journal where I just wrote down all the ways that I would need God to just really work on my heart if I was going to become a mom. And so today I kind of wanted to pick up where that decision had been made that we did want to have kids. I do want to give a trigger warning / disclaimer that while we're going to be talking about the very positive pregnancy experience that I did eventually have, we are also going to be talking about my first pregnancy that ended in miscarriage. So for anyone who is a survivor of miscarriage, of pregnancy loss, baby loss, just wanted to give that trigger warning. And for anyone who is still in waiting, I am sending you all the baby dust. Like I've said a few times now, I was extremely fearful of pregnancy, mostly due to a lot of medical anxiety. I am someone who had pretty severe emetophobia growing up, which is the fear of throwing up. To me, throwing up was like the worst thing in the world that could happen. I don't think that I ever realized how much fear I had around it. You know, every time that I would travel, I'd get on a plane and I'd have to clock like, okay, is there a barf bag? Is there a, bathroom close? Like, what do I do if I get sick? For me, that was just something I was fearful of. I don't know. So when it came to pregnancy, obviously one of my fears was the morning sickness and being so sick all the time. But I think that also tied into the fact that I own my own business. And so the idea of, being so sick and not being able to function and work like normal definitely scared me. I think I was just scared of like all the complications and things that could go wrong during pregnancy. And I remember sharing this list on my TikTok of all the things that I was fearful of during pregnancy and how all of them actually turned out to be okay. So hopefully I can shine a more positive light on pregnancy, because like I said, when I did become pregnant for the second time, I did have a very good pregnancy experience. So I hope I can shed some positive light on that. But I do, in order to talk about that, I do have to talk about my first experience becoming pregnant, which is a little bit harder to talk about. So my husband and I eloped in October of 2020 because of COVID, and we planned a reception celebration the year after, so October of 2021. And throughout that entire year between our elopement and our wedding, we had talked, multiple times about when was the right time to start trying to have a baby. And we had talked about a few different months, just trying to figure out what would be best, like if I was sick around the wedding, etc. And to me, I started to kind of develop this dream of being able to tell Sean, my husband, that I was pregnant on our wedding day, our day that we got to celebrate with our family and friends. And so I kind of lined up, everything to where I thought that would work out. And so our wedding was on a Sunday, and on that Wednesday, I decided to take a pregnancy test. I was in Target, and I don't really remember having any symptoms that made me think I was pregnant, but I was obviously excited to take the test because I ended up taking it in Target. And I pee on the stick in the bathroom, whatever. It looks negative, so I throw it in my purse, and I go to my car, and I just pull it out again, and it's positive. And I'm like, wait, what? I just have this moment of is this real? Did the dye run because I threw it in my purse? I really didn't know what to think. I remember calling my best friend at the time and my sister and was just like, is this real? What do I do? And so I knew I immediately had to go home and take more tests. And, it was a very faint positive. It wasn't really being picked up on my phone, but if you're a woman, any positive is a positive. And so it was a pink dye test. I have had bad luck with blue dye tests. They just seem the dye runs easier for me. And so it was a pink dye test. And any test that I was taking was having a very faint positive. And so I don't remember how many days DPO I was at that point. I think it was only 8 or 10. It was pretty early. And so I figured that the faint positive was just because it was early. And so that was Wednesday, and my plan was to tell Sean at our first look on Sunday, because we were going to do a very private first look with our photographers, and I thought, how perfect would that be to get his reaction on camera? And I couldn't wait 5 days to tell him. I actually remember waking up and feeling sick the next day, and I knew that if I was going to be struggling over the weekend, I had to tell him why. I needed him to know, because it was going to be a crazy weekend. Our friends and family were all flying in, and they were all going to be at our house that Saturday and then that wedding on Sunday. And I just knew that he needed to be in the know if I was going to be struggling. And so I had already purchased a little baby onesie that said hello dad, just in case we got a positive test that month. And so I believe it was Thursday, the next day, that I asked him if he wanted to see his wedding gift. And my heart is beating really fast talking about this. So I was like, all right, stay here, I'll be right back. And I set up our dining room table with the little onesie and the positive tests. And at this point, I had gotten a positive blue dye test as well. Everything was very faint. And so I had him come out, and I showed him, and, I remember him looking at the tests and being like, really? They're very light. And I remember saying, any positive is a positive. It might just be very early. And so, we had the whole moment of being emotional and just really soaking it in. And I remember in that moment being so... It's sad because right now I want to say blissfully unaware, but in that moment I was so joyful. I had no fear. I just felt this immediate connection to that baby. I was convinced it was a boy, probably because of Sean's family. And yeah, I just felt every emotion that I wanted to feel when I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't scared. I was excited. I felt connected. I just felt so much pure peace and joy. And that's how every woman should get to feel when they experience pregnancy for the first time. And I say that because when you've gone through loss, and with my second pregnancy, which I'll get more into, it definitely hinders those feelings. There's a lot more fear. There's a lot more uncertainty. There's a lot more anxiety. And I wish that I could have experienced that same joy and peace and excitement again the second time. But like I said, I was blissfully unaware of what could have happened, you know. And so I tell Sean on that Thursday, and Friday morning, my mom drove in, and she pulled up to the house, and I came outside with a little baby onesie, and we told her, and of course she was so excited. And then we decided that we were going to tell his parents as well that night. And so we all went out to dinner. It was my mom, his dad, his stepmom, his brother, and we told them. And so it was just so much joy and so much excitement, and it just really added to the weekend. And it was honestly everything I could have and would have dreamed of getting to tell him that weekend. And I do feel grateful that we had that experience. You know, even looking back, it was incredible. And I still really, really, really wrestle with why God did this happen. And we'll talk more about that. But if you try to see the silver lining in everything, or if you try and see some positive in everything, it really was such a blessing to get to tell him that weekend, and to get to tell our parents. And like the fact that everyone was in one place when our family lives all over the country was just, it couldn't have gone more perfectly up until that point, up until that Friday night. And so, like I said, Saturday, we were having everyone at our house for like a big barbecue, just because our family lives all over the country. And so to have everyone in one place and be able to come to our home, and it was really special. But I woke up that Saturday and I was bleeding heavily. And I just knew, like, I think in the back of my mind, the faint positives worried me a little bit, but it wasn't enough to overpower the excitement. But in that moment, I knew that it was gone, and it was so fast. I mean, to have a positive test and to miscarry 2 days later is crazy. And there were so many feelings around it. I think at first I questioned myself a lot, like, was I even pregnant? Was I even allowed to feel like I lost a pregnancy? Was this even a real miscarriage? Like, I did not know. And my husband, Sean, he was my rock in that moment. I mean, he was just so great at reassuring me that it wasn't my fault and it was okay. And like, I know, and I'm sure that he was hurting so much as well, knowing how badly he wanted to be a father. But I feel like he really just put his feelings aside and was such a great comfort to me that weekend. And it was also really special because my mom was there and was able to see how he handled it and how much he was my rock. And I think for her to see like his emotional side more and how good of a partner he is to me and how well he loves me, that was just all really, really special. But it was rough. I mean, having our entire friends and family at our house when it's supposed to be this huge, exciting weekend, not knowing that I was literally like miscarrying as everyone was there. That was just really, really hard to be present in that moment, to be excited in that moment. And I remember one of my friends who's a nurse was at the house, and I pulled her aside and told her and was like, basically, what do I expect? You know, how do I make sure I'm okay? And thank God for her, because that was just able to give me some peace that day. And I think I really just had to put the emotions aside and be present that weekend as much as I could. I still look back on our wedding celebration day as such a positive, incredible day. I mean, we had so much fun. We were so present with everyone there. Like, when I look back, you know, a lot of people feel like they're just kind of running around and don't actually get to like be with their loved ones on their wedding day. But we were so lucky that, you know, we had a pretty small celebration. I think it was like 80 people, and we just got to be so present. And I think for Sean and I, it was even more, I want to say, special, because, you know, him and I were so bonded over this grief that no one knew that we were experiencing. And I remember when we did our first dance, And again, no one knew, but that was really when I lost it, because our first dance song was From the Ground Up by Dan and Shay. And it's all about, grandma and granddad built this family, and we can't wait to continue building this family and our own little house and our own little baby. And so that was really hard to process in that moment of, this song had so much meaning to us because we have so much respect for the family that his grandparents grew, and that, my grandparents grew. And it just took on a whole new meaning in that moment for us. And so, even though it was such a sad thing, like when I look back at like pictures and videos of our first dance, I'm like, how special is it that like we in that moment, I mean, my mom knew obviously, and I think he did end up telling his dad and stepmom that we were losing the pregnancy. But in that moment, when you look back at those photos and videos, it's like him and I were just so bonded over this thing that no one else knew about in that moment. And to me, it just made it so much more special. And that was my experience that weekend with miscarrying. And so pretty much Monday morning, I went to my doctor and they confirmed and basically just said that, you have to think about it, that this was your first time your body even tried to be pregnant. And sometimes your body's really good at protecting itself. And so if it recognized that something was wrong with the pregnancy, it protected itself and that pregnancy didn't stick. And so it was a lot of emotion to process. I still to this day really struggle because as someone who didn't want to have kids growing up, and to just see the beautiful transformation that God did with my heart to prepare me and give me that excitement and that joy and that peace about having children, I really still struggle to this day with, all right, God, like, why did you allow me to get to a place of wanting a child so bad and wanting to experience pregnancy and experience motherhood so bad just for it to be taken away this first time? And that's, again, like I said, still to this day, something that I struggle with. And I know, like, the practical answer is my body was protecting itself. Maybe, and even now that I have a child, like, I wouldn't have my daughter if that pregnancy had progressed. And I know all of that in the physical world. It's just more of like in the spiritual sense of why prepare me and allow me to have that excitement and that bliss, like that ignorant bliss for all of this to happen, So I try to see the good and I try to see all the different ways that God has come. I mean, God has done miracles for us and moved mountains for us since then, but that is definitely something I still question. I really wrestled with that for months after. There was a lot of grief that I don't think I processed. I had a really hard time because there were a lot of people that were very, very close to me who did not understand the grief, did not understand the emotions surrounding it. And I think it was easier for them to just not acknowledge it, not check in, not bring it up when that wasn't what I needed. And so it was really hard to not only be grieving myself, but to not feel completely supported by some of the people that were closest to me in that moment. And so pretty much from October until March, I grieved a lot. I, didn't treat my body the best. I think I was just angry and disappointed in my body for not doing what it was supposed to do, when in reality, it did do what it was supposed to do. It did clear out anything that was unsafe to my body. So people would ask, are you going to try again? When do you think you're going to have a baby? And, people, of course, who didn't know what we had been through, asking those types of questions. And I would make excuses of like, I gained a lot of weight in my grief and I want to lose it before I have a baby. I want to feel like my body's healthy again. I want to be prepared. And again, there's just never a right time. There's never a perfect time to have a baby. And come about like March, one of our close friends had a baby, and I truly think it was because of that baby that I ended up having my daughter. I remember we went to their house to meet the baby, and I just held him all night, and I even have a picture. I had one of my friends, Morgan, who is a godsend, bought me this necklace that was a mustard seed, and it was basically saying, you know, even though your baby was the size of a mustard seed, like, they meant something and they mattered, their life mattered, and they'll be waiting for you up in heaven. And so that was really special. That was such a special gift. I've passed that gift. I've given that same gift to other friends that have had miscarriages because it was so, so special to me. But anyway, I have a picture of our friend's brand new baby. I was holding him, and he's holding that necklace. And in the moment, I didn't think much of it, but looking back, it was just very symbolic, because I remember our friend that night, who knew what had happened, you know, came to Sean and I and was like, you know, there's never going to be a perfect time. Like, you guys just got to do it. Like, you have to jump back into it in order to get to experience it without thinking too much about it. And so, I think that's kind of the approach that I ended up taking, was like, I'm never going to feel ready. If I wait until I'm healed from this grief, it would be years. And I knew I still wanted a baby. I was just very fearful of having the same experience over and over again, or, you know, falling more in love or progressing more in the pregnancy and then having it happen. So there was just so much fear that surrounded getting pregnant again. And we kind of just said, if it happens, it happens. And, you know, we're not going to plan anything. And that next month, it was a Wednesday, ironically, the day before, I had set up this whole photo shoot for my business, for like new pictures for my website. And so to me, it's really cool to look back at those, knowing that I was pregnant and didn't know, or knowing that that was kind of like my last big photo shoot for my business before becoming a mom. And so anyway, it was a Wednesday. I think it was April 7th. I jokingly said to Sean, I had therapy that day, and I was like, I should probably just like take a pregnancy test before therapy, like just in case, you know. And not thinking anything of it. Again, I wasn't really having symptoms. Like, I did not feel pregnant. Kind of like, I felt more pregnant that first time. I felt kind of like an inkling that first time, whereas the second time, I had no clue. I was just taking a pregnancy test to put it to rest and go have therapy. And I took 2 tests. I took a pink dye and a blue dye. Sean was home. I remember he was home in the other room, like playing games or whatever. He had off that day. And I go in my bathroom. I had let the tests sit, and I left them face up, which was stupid. And I didn't get out my phone to record because, again, I just didn't think anything of it. I didn't think I was pregnant. They were big, fat positives, like extremely positive. The darkest I had seen compared to last time. I was definitely in shock because I was not expecting it. And I wish I would have pulled out my phone to take a video, and I wish I would have taken the time to really process. But I literally walked out of the bathroom, was like, Sean, you need to come here. And he was in the middle of something. So he's like, all right, like, hold on, I'll be right there. And I called my sister. I FaceTimed her and I showed her the tests, and it just feels like a whirlwind. Like, I definitely didn't experience that pure, peaceful joy that I did the first time. And there was a lot of anger that was robbed from me, that I didn't get to have that pure bliss that second time, where it was immediate fear of, what if this doesn't stick? I can't get too excited. And so again, like, even in that moment of, like, you know, Sean came in and he kind of knew, he knew I was taking the pregnancy test before therapy. And so he knew by my reaction of like, Sean, you need to come here. He knew. And so when he came in the room, I showed him, and he was like, what? Like, those are positive. And I was like, yeah. And so, you know, immediately he's like, it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Like, look how strong those tests are. You need to be excited. Let yourself be excited. He said all the right things. But I still really struggled to be super excited, and also just to process it. I honestly, from that moment until, I want to say maybe like 16 weeks, I just did not let myself be excited. Like, every doctor's appointment, I was worried that we were going to get bad news. And I just did not let myself be excited. And I remember, like, my mom would say to me, like, you just have to let it go. You have to, like, trust that this is your baby and that God's going to protect it, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember just being, like, mad that she would say that and be, how could you say that when he let us lose the first one? Like, I just felt like I had to hold on so tightly to this one in hopes that it would stay, that I couldn't trust that it would, you know. Even though there was all of that fear, and that the fear lasted weeks and weeks, and it was always in the back of my mind, I did have a very positive pregnancy experience. So immediately when I found out I was pregnant, obviously because I had miscarried before, my doctors were very good about, you know, doing tests in the office. We had a very early ultrasound. I had very early testing done, just for some like genetic things, and I'm predisposed to gestational diabetes, like all those things. I had a ton of early testing done to make sure that like everything looked good. And so that it did help me a little bit, you know, like I think we had our first ultrasound at 6 weeks, and we didn't really expect to see anything, but we saw our little blueberry, and she had a heartbeat. And so that was just so reassuring to me, because when we went into the office for our first ultrasound, I remember the nurse being like, I think you might have ovulated late because you are measuring like a week behind what we thought you were. And so I think I thought I was 7 weeks, but I was 6 weeks. And so she told us before, you know, she did anything, like, don't expect to hear a heartbeat. It might be too early, but that little blueberry had a very strong heartbeat at 6 weeks. And so that was really incredible to see. And from there, I mean, my first trimester was rough, like any pregnancy. I will say, for someone who was so fearful of vomiting for 12 weeks straight, I luckily did not have the vomiting. I had extreme nausea, extreme fatigue, but I did not have all of the things that I was most fearful of. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I went on a girls' trip at like 10 weeks, and I did not get to do much because of the nausea and the exhaustion. But I want to say like week 11 I started to feel better, and my husband and I went on a baby moon / very late honeymoon when I was 16 weeks, and I felt great. We had a really good trip. I wasn't super sick, I wasn't super exhausted, and so by 16 weeks, that second trimester, I was feeling really good, and I really did have a very positive experience. I loved dressing the baby bump. I miss dressing the baby bump. There's something to be said about, as women, you know, who are told our whole lives we have to be small and cover our bellies, and to just be able to like let it all hang out and like not feel self-conscious about dressing yourself or letting your belly out. Like, I really enjoyed dressing that bump. Yeah, I really had a great second trimester. I felt really good. I felt really confident in my body. I felt comfortable in my body. In my third trimester, I think the third trimester for everyone, your body really starts to feel it, you know, like your hips and your back, and you're having trouble sleeping. And so all those like normal things did happen the third trimester, but otherwise I was feeling really good. Like, I was cleaning the house and doing chores and, you know, getting around really, really good. And so for someone who is extremely fearful of pregnancy, and if you are someone who is extremely fearful of pregnancy, even though I experienced loss, I want you to know that it's possible to have a positive pregnancy experience. And yes, there's risks. Yes, there's outliers. Yes, some people really struggle, and that's okay. And that's valid. And it can be really hard, but it can also be really easy and really good. And I didn't see enough of that online. I think I fed a lot into the fear mongering around pregnancy, around, you know, having kids. And in the end, I had a really positive experience. Like I said, like I knew that this episode was going to have a hard part, but I also wanted this episode to have a positive part, that once I got those really strong, dark positives, I had such a great support team, you know, when it came to my friends and family, but I also had great support in that I found a doctor who had understood what I had been through, and so was there to reassure me over and over again that I was going to be okay, and that this pregnancy was healthy and strong. And I mean, I felt her kick we were in Florida on our baby moon when I felt her kick for the first time, and that was 16 weeks. And so I just felt her moving, and we had our baby shower / gender reveal in July. I think I was 19 weeks, and that was the hardest thing to do, was to wait 19 weeks to find out the gender, because I think I had the blood test done at 10 weeks, and our friend just like had the results sitting and waiting for our gender reveal, because all of our friends and family had to come from out of state or far away. Like I said in another episode, was convinced that we were having a boy because my husband's family is all boys. At that point, there had only been one girl in like 80 years. And so it was a big deal. In my brain, it was just always a boy. And when I found out it was a girl, I think I was in shock. Like, I didn't fully have a reaction at my gender reveal. We ended up doing kind of a funny way to reveal it, and it went a little sideways, which I think affected the reaction. So basically, the idea was everyone would get a cupcake. One of the cupcakes would have the gender in it. And we didn't know what the gender was, but we had predetermined and told our friend that we wanted the gender cupcake to go to my father-in-law, my husband's father, because it was his first grandchild. And so we knew that he was supposed to be the one who had the color, even though no one else knew. And so when it came time for everyone to bite into their cupcakes, I bite into my cupcake and I see a color, and I'm freaking out because I'm like, I'm not supposed to see this. Like, the cupcakes got switched. Like, this is wrong. You know what I mean? So I didn't really process what I was seeing, because I looked at my husband and I'm like, oh my God, I have a color. I'm not supposed to have a color. And he was just like, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see, but he was kind of like shushing me, like, don't worry about it. And I didn't know that my husband had asked our friend who made the cupcakes to also give him and I the color, so that we could see and we could know, as well as my father-in-law. And so it was pink. It was a girl. And again, like, I had not fully processed it in that moment. And afterwards, I feel like I had kind of a shocking reaction. Like, again, I had this dream that I had a very vivid picture of my daughter. I had written in my prayer journal, like, I want to have a daughter. But I think I had gotten so comfortable with the idea of being a boy mom, or having and raising boys, that when I found out it was a girl, I was actually very scared. I was a terror to my parents growing up. I was just Miss Independent. I wanted to be the only child so bad that I was just a bully to my siblings. Like, I really was not a great child growing up. And so I was very fearful of kind of having that same experience having a daughter. I should have been more excited, and I think it was just a way of like self-preservation, of not getting too excited in that moment, and again just leaning more into the what ifs, which I should not have done, but because of my track record, I was just, and me still wrestling with God over why, I was leaning more into fear in that moment. But everything else with our actual pregnancy itself went pretty smoothly. I don't want to talk about the end of my pregnancy on this episode because it is relevant to my birth story. So next week, when we cover my birth story, I will talk more about the end of my pregnancy. But again, the reason that I really wanted to do this series, and specifically this episode, is that for someone who was so fearful of pregnancy, of having kids, unsure of having kids, and even after experiencing loss and all of the grief and emotions that came with loss, I could have been so negative and fearful of this pregnancy. But I look back on the pregnancy itself with so much fondness. Like, I loved my body. I loved being able to hold and feel my baby and just know that she was safe inside of me. I wasn't as sick as I could have been, and I was able to get around, and I really did have such a positive pregnancy experience that I want to share that for anyone who is fearful of pregnancy, who doesn't know if they want to be pregnant or carry their child. There's so much fear mongering online, and I just want you to know that it is possible to have a positive pregnancy experience, even after loss, even after grief. I hope that if you're someone who has been on the fence about having a child because of your fears surrounding pregnancy, I want to first acknowledge that that's completely valid, and that there are people who have hard experiences. I mean, maybe you have, medical things in your family. Like, I completely understand, and that fear is totally, totally valid. But if that fear doesn't have backing like that, or if there aren't real reasons that you are fearful besides the what ifs, I want you to think, what if it is positive? If I hadn't said yes to experiencing pregnancy, I would never know the feeling of literally creating life inside of yourself. And like, while it's happening, your brain doesn't fully process it. And like, everyone talks about how being pregnant is this magnificent and beautiful and godly experience. And I didn't feel that while I was pregnant, but now that my daughter is here and almost 3 years old, like, if I hadn't said yes to pregnancy, I never would know the feeling of getting to carry my child, of getting to feel her move inside of me, of getting to literally grow this human that comes to life and then has this insanely awesome personality. Like, it is truly a one of a kind experience, and I know that not everyone gets to have it, and I don't take that for granted at all. But I just want to express that if I had not said yes to not only experiencing pregnancy that first time where I got to have that blissful, peaceful joy, if I hadn't said yes to trying again, if I hadn't said yes to moving past the grief and moving past the fears, that I would not have gotten to sit here and tell you that pregnancy can be enjoyable and that it doesn't have to be hard or fearful. So I hope you took something away from this episode. I hope that if you are a mother who is in her season of waiting, I am cheering for you, sending you all the baby dust. And if you're someone who is scared of pregnancy, I hope that this was a good episode for you to listen to and know that it can be positive. Next week, we're going to talk about my birth story. And much like today, there is going to be the first part that is very positive, and there is going to be the second part that may be very difficult to listen to. So I do just want to give that trigger warning if you're looking forward to next week's episode. While we are going to talk about the parts of birth that can be very positive and were very positive for me, I did have a very traumatic ending to my birth. And so again, just putting that out there for anyone who is looking forward to listening next week. I do feel like it's very important for me to share both sides of it, again, both sides of the triumph and the trauma, the positives and the negatives, because we can all learn something from both sides of the coin. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of If I Hadn't Said Yes. If this episode inspired, encouraged, or moved you in any way, your rating and review would be greatly appreciated. Or maybe this episode made you think of someone in your life that you want to encourage to go for their big yes. Feel free to share it with a friend. You can keep up with all of our content at If I Hadn't Said Yes Pod on Instagram. We'll see you next week.